Hi, welcome to Mourning Talk Show. Today, my interview with James Avramenko. James is the host of a great podcast called Friendless, where I don't want to wreck it, but he attacks the problem of Facebook and our addiction to and dependence on Facebook head on and in a very personal way. He's talking to his Facebook friends in real life. So I loved the conversation. I found it was kind of more nuanced. He's not just a Facebook hater, but he had some interesting thoughts on obviously Facebook and friendship and empathy and performance, because he's from a performance background. So I loved talking to James. I'm hoping to talk to him again in the future. And so in the meantime, my conversation with James Avramenko. Now, the video on this one didn't work out. I had a couple of interviews where the video hasn't worked out, so I am working on a better provider for these internet meetings. So look for that in the near future. If you like this kind of content, please like and subscribe. I'd love to bring you more of it. And now, my conversation with James Avramenko. All right. Recording in progress.
Beautiful.
James Avramenko.
Yeah.
Welcome to Mourning Talk.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
No problem. So I usually do a little intro video to these things, but it's usually best if you give a short bio of yourself so that I don't screw anything up too bad.
Fair enough. So I am currently Saskatoon-based writer and podcaster. This week, I'm most famous for running a podcast called Friendless, which is about every episode I interview somebody off of my Facebook list. We reconnect, talk about how we use social media, how we communicate with each other and interrelate, and then we unfriend at the end of the show, and we decide how or if we're going to stay in contact, whether it's other social medias, Instagram, Twitter, all that, or emails or anything, or if we're just gonna say, have a good life.
Yeah, peace out. No harm done. Right.
Yeah.
So it's a wonderful concept for a podcast, and it really immediately drew my eye. Normally, when I reach out to someone for an interview, I've known about them a little longer, but this, I felt like it's such a relatable topic. We can kind of jump right in, and I think people around the world are applauding you, because it's like, in what crazy alternate universe does it take balls to phone somebody up and have a conversation like that? We're kind of through the looking glass these days. The fact that what you're doing is in any way odd is odd.
That is, it's funny that it's been one of the funny kind of elements that I've been trying to explain to people is that it's not actually about the Facebook part. That's just sort of where I draw my guest list from, in a way,
Okay.
Where what I'm really interested in is exactly that, is this idea of having basic human conversations one-on-one and in person, because so much is so dehumanized through text and through email and even just us connecting, and sending emails and kind of being like, who is this guy? What's the deal with this? Let's kind of walk it through a little, feel it out, Whereas if we had spoken, it would have been like, oh yeah, okay, I totally get what you're going for, because we're so visually based in our communication, and social media kills any kind of visuals.
Totally. Yeah, the nonverbal stuff, right? If you just took the text from anyone's day of speech, you'd be like, what a despicable mother, because you can't see any of the other stuff.
Yep. Everybody also sounds like a complete moron when you actually look at the sort of transcript of our daily conversations. We sound like absolute idiots,
Absolutely, including this conversation would, but this is real. Yeah. So one thing I want to pick up on what you've already said that is really interesting, and it was an intuition I had that you weren't that this wasn't a Facebook is pure evil thing. That you're saying
No.
that Facebook, that it wasn't, you weren't specifically responding to Facebook as this, like, the Hydra that you have to kill or something.
No, and that's actually been sort of one of the, there's been some press coverage this week that I'm very grateful for. I'm not turning my nose up at anything, but it's they often really lean heavily on the Facebook element of it. They really lean into this idea of you're breaking up with Facebook and you're telling all your friends why you're not friends with them anymore. And it's like, no, no, no. Like where I came to where because I've had this idea for a couple of years. I had Facebook when it was like a university website. So you could only be friends with, I went to UVic, and so you could only have people from UVic on your site. That's it. You couldn't
Right.
talk to anybody else. And then it slowly through the years opened up more and more. First there was other schools, then there was, one day my mom friend requested me and I went,
Right. That's the
game's
day, right?
over. Right? Yeah.
Yeah. I know all about that. Ooh.
You know,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, do you mind if I break in and ask? You don't have to answer this, but how old a guy are you?
Oh, yeah, no, it's okay. I'm 32. So I
Okay.
got Facebook when I was 18.
Okay.
So, I have been in the daily routine of my life. I have been doing Facebook longer than any of my current relationships aside from family. I
Nice.
was on Facebook almost a decade longer than when I met my wife.
Yeah. Okay.
A short of eating, sleeping, going to the bathroom. Facebook is the longest running daily behavior that I have in my life right now, and
Yeah.
that was where the initial idea came from, was sort of, it was more about me than it was about the people. It was about assessing my daily behavior, becoming,
Hmm.
just becoming more sort of aware of, because there's that behavior you have where you open your Facebook app, you scroll through a little blindly, maybe Netflix is on in the background, so you're sort of like half paying attention to everything around you. You sort
Hmm.
of mindlessly scroll, and then you close it down, you put your phone down for maybe 30 seconds, you look at the TV screen, and then you pick your phone back up and you open Facebook,
Yeah.
it becomes this perpetual cycle of nothingness, like I'm not actually watching the show that's on. I'm not actually paying attention to what's on the
Yeah.
feed. I'm purely just sort of moving,
Right.
you know. And I
Yeah.
and that was where the initial idea came from, was I really wanted to just analyze what I was doing on this website.
Right. Yeah. And so there's a lot there. So while uh, you're not particularly saying that Facebook is an evil thing. You are talking about the way that it enables or encourages certain habits,
Hmm.
and that So what's awesome is that th- how would I put this? For many people, when they encounter something like that, they just go on Facebook and they
Yeah.
complain about it in a post. And it's so what I like about what you're doing is it's in my view, it's not self-righteous.
Mm.
It's like saying, hey, I wanted to make a change in my personal behavior. I mean, this is kind of one of the things, one of my like I don't know, guiding principles in life is that
Mm.
personal change is slow and painful. It takes effort, and
Yeah.
rather than bemoan it and prescribe in a short little like self-written article,
Yeah.
you're actually walking people through the steps. So it's way more than just solving your own problem. You're actually
Mm.
just kind of modeling something, but the way it's done is very it's not heavy-handed.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I
Well,
think
thank you. I appreciate that.
no problem. And so for anybody watching this, I mean, you're more well known than me, but anybody watching this who hasn't watched or hasn't listened to your podcast yet, I'll just say that um, I I think the strength of it is that you are a good conversationalist.
Mm.
And you're a likable, affable guy. You have a good personality for this, and I seem to recall in one of the maybe it was in a news interview. I saw a
Mm.
news interview first, and you had said you wanted to have a podcast for a while.
Mhm.
I can understand that because you've kind of got that outgoing personality that just fits in really well for this kind of things. So,
Thank you. I really
anyway,
appreciate that.
yeah, no problem. So maybe just describe your first day on Facebook. Like what, or your
Mm.
do you remember making your account? Do you remember what you thought about it or how you thought it was going to affect your life?
Yeah, I'm from a bit of a funny window in terms of sort of technology adoption because I'm a
Me too.
little right. Yeah, like I'm sort of a little too young for certain platforms. I know my brother was using like ICQ a ton, and he was on like
I did a bit of that.
classic. Yeah, right. So I was right on the tail end of that, right?
Okay.
My high school was predominantly spent on like MySpace. Nexopia was a big one for like 1 year. Yeah,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I was sort of like I was used to that type of platform in that I understood the behavior of making a profile picture, talking about yourself a little bit, and then each person writing on their wall. And so Facebook didn't strike me as anything unique or revolutionary. I actually like I don't remember the exact day, but I do remember when I signed up for it, I didn't think of it any more than an easier way to pass homework notes back and forth. That was what we initially used it for. We would, if I got, if I was, can I say if I was too stoned to go to class,
You may say it.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay,
you may.
right? If I
Permission
was too
granted.
high to go to class, then I would write to somebody, can you send me the notes to, theater history or whatever? And then people started posting albums very rapidly. And without
Photo
fail,
albums.
yeah. And so without fail, everybody's first photo album was almost uniformly just photos of themselves because nobody really knew what this was or what we were doing. So it was always just albums of just your face,
Yeah. Yeah.
and and uh, and I just kind of rolled my eyes and then did it, because
Yeah.
it was like, well, I guess this is what we use the platform for
Yeah.
now, you know.
I'm not above selfies occasionally
No.
myself,
Yeah,
you know?
no, it's never, I've never really seen the point in demeaning social behavior, it's this is not new behavior. It's just more in the open, in the same way
Right.
that we used to have photo albums and slideshows, and your friend would go on a trip and they'd come back and they'd make you sit through
Yeah.
a slideshow of their trip to China.
Right.
Now we just have it on our phones instead of having to sit in their living room.
Right. And
So,
then there's also kind of micro, sort of invisible communities of people who feel that social media should be a certain thing and shouldn't be another thing. Like I remember having someone a long time ago tell me that I was, with kind of, she had a bit of a, I have to hate to break it to you, but you're kind of curating your life the way you do it.
right.
You're curating, and I thought it made me think about it because I'm like, haven't we always curated our lives? Like like you would never go to your grandma's house and open the photo album and like, oh, here's me taking a dump. Like it's
Yeah, you only took certain pictures.
yeah, you took and the only reason you ended up with the horrible ones is because it was an accident. So anyway,
Mhm.
so yeah, I don't really have a point there. I'm just
No, I do. No, but I think that that's actually a really important line of thought is this idea of self-curation. And actually, I was reading a fascinating article recently talking about how social media has actually destroyed our ability to self-curate because one element of a life is to be able to forget things and to be
mm,
able to make mistakes and to be able to speak out of turn, say something wrong, maybe offend somebody, but then to move on, to learn
right,
and to not have, it's essentially the behavior of rubbing a dog's face when they pee in the house,
right,
to constantly hold you accountable to every little thing that you've ever done. We used to be able to, you know, we used to be able to forget some of the mistakes we made
right,
because we would internalize just the rough lesson of it and then
yeah,
move on. Whereas now, Facebook has
hey,
that whole feature of every day you get reminded 10 years ago on
10 years
this
ago.
day you said this stupid thing and now don't forget this.
Yeah, it's embarrassing, right? Because you evolve,
Perpetual
and
shame.
yeah, there is a healthy amount of the old you dying away,
Yeah.
like yeah, dying away in people's memories and dying away in your own memory, and to a certain degree, we have to believe our current fiction of who we are, and it's not necessarily a fiction. It's just it's what is most salient to us about ourselves right now. So
Absolutely.
and another thing I think you said that is right up my alley is the idea of how it's kind of futile to be critical of social trims. One of the purposes of this channel, one of the reasons you've seen how diverse my topics can be.
Hmm.
One of the uniting things about this channel is that I want to talk about not what we think people should be, but what they really do. And so we have to almost look at ourselves like I'm sorry, I don't want to preach here, but
Yeah.
like children, where it's like when a child does something that's not the smartest, you say, you know what? I have two things. I can punish you, and shame you, or we can change what's going on that made you feel you needed to do that. So
Yeah.
if we are addicted to Facebook, yes, there's algorithms being programmed to draw us in. Yes, there's things designed to put us in an echo chamber, but we're still taking a bite from the plate every time.
Yep.
We're still lifting the fork to our face, and that's what I mean. Again, that's what I love about what you're doing, because you're recognizing that it's going to be a process to untangle and to untangle yourself from this thing that
Yeah.
you are, that part of you lives in. It's
Yeah.
like it's a technology, and we're like this other guy I interviewed, John Vervaeke. He says we're natural cyborgs. So as
Yes.
soon as there's something external that we can use to increase our capacities, we're going to
We'll
use it.
always do it.
Yeah, and then we have to learn to back up and kind of learn to back up the truck, and hopefully like wisdom can be something we keep with us at all times, but it's like,
That's the hope.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I want to ask a question that the answer might be no, but it seems like from what I've listened to, you're kind of involved in theater, or you're involved in performance of some kind. I was listening to one by Javier, and I can't remember his last name.
Aguilar.
Yeah, and
Yeah, Javi. Yeah.
yeah, and Javier was mentioning, or Javi was mentioning, just like sort of theater training and empathy.
Yeah.
And that was really interesting to me. That's probably the most specific to an episode thing I wanted to ask you about. Do you think that your experience in theater has given you some perspective that's helped this project?
Definitely. I mean, it's a funny thing because I feel like I've kind of always I feel like I've spent my whole life sort of arguing for the merits of art and for being artistic. I don't particularly actually like the sort of commodification of art. I'm not a big fan of the way artists are forced to sell their art. I think it's okay for them to get paid. I think that's the difference, is that I think it's okay for an artist to be paid. I don't think they should have to be in a system where they can only survive off of that, though.
Right.
And I don't think we have a culture that celebrates that, because
Yeah.
I see art as self-expression, and I think everybody needs to self-express.
Right.
A lot of the most vitriolic comments I see, whether it's about me, about the show, about just anything in particular, often it sort of dances around these ideas of vulnerability and of what some people define as feminine behavior versus masculine behavior, and all these kinds of
Oh,
you're being good because you're strong, you're being bad because you're weak, all these kinds of it all floats in that miasma. And
okay.
what I find art, and for me personally theater did for me, is it taught me empathy, which is the key factor to being a productive member of society, is
Yeah.
being, because there's a difference between being empathetic and being sympathetic. Sympathy
Yeah.
to me is a form of control, because it's a form of pity. It keeps
Yeah.
the other person down. Whereas
Yeah.
empathy says, you may not be right, you may not be wrong, but I can see why you're doing what you're doing,
Sympathy would be like a delineation, and empathy would be like an integration.
Bingo, exactly. And I
Yeah.
think that that's what theater makes you do, because theater inherently is an art of figuring out why someone else is doing what they're doing,
Right.
because you're given a role, and sometimes you're given a role that is really close to you, and so it's easy, and sometimes you're given a role that's really different from you, and so
Yeah.
you have to work, because
Right.
the art of theater is to make the audience believe that you're someone else,
Right.
and so that at its core is a practice in empathy.
So if I could jump in there, like
Mhm.
you're really giving me some thoughts. This is great.
Yeah, yeah.
I hadn't really thought about this, but in a way, uh, in a way, I feel like culture
Mhm.
wants us to believe that empathy is a default mode,
Mhm.
so that if left to your own devices, uh, you are empathetic, or you know what I mean.
Mhm. Mhm.
People don't necessarily think that about others, but they
Yeah.
think it about themselves.
They
So
always
they
think
think,
they're empathetic. Yeah.
yeah, if people would stop fucking my shit up,
Yeah.
then they would see how empathetic I am. But it's
Yeah.
like,
It's the good guy syndrome.
right.
I'm a good
So
guy, right?
what I love about what you're saying, and hopefully I can tie this into Facebook, is that by putting some artifice to it, by stepping outside of reality, and by actually being what some could consider false,
Hmm.
uh, you're actually forced to pick apart what a person does, and you're forced to pick apart what will ring true to an audience. So in a way, it's like, we're saying that empathy has to be cultivated and thought about critically, but at the same time, we can recognize it. So like, maybe so the
Hmm.
audience, if you wouldn't have to learn empathy if the audience didn't have the potential for empathy somewhere within themselves. So
Hmm.
it's a really complicated idea,
Yeah.
that empathy is both something we naturally recognize and also
Hmm.
something we have to step aside and cultivate
Well, it's
intentionally.
this idea of, your brain is just as much a muscle as any other part of you. And so you
Yeah.
have to make sure that you're working it the proper way, and that you're working the muscles the proper way. And
Right.
for me, the element, the key exercise for your brain is empathy practice, right? Is the
Right.
idea of being mindful of yourself. I think this actually kind of does tie back into a lot of what we were talking about, though, is this idea of, I think a lot of people are really concerned about telling other people what they're doing wrong. Whereas to me, what I'm interested in is just being right for myself. And if other
Mm.
people are into it, cool. And if they're not, that's fine, because that's their reality and this is mine, And I'm
Mm.
not talking about the big stuff about, like, I'm allowed to be a dick to you because I think that I'm right because of my XYZ.
Right.
But what I mean by that is this idea of, if it feels good for me to be quiet for a couple hours a day, it's not your right to tell me I'm lazy or that I'm unproductive, or
Right.
I'm allowed to be as slow and as silent as I want to be, if that's what makes
Right.
my existence feel good,
Yeah.
right?
Well, that's
Um,
empathy for yourself.
Bingo. Exactly. Yeah, and I think that that's exactly it. And I think that I think you become stronger when you become more concerned with practicing for yourself rather than practicing to prove other people
Right.
right or wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I can understand that. I mean, and the I think empathy is one of those things where when you gain greater empathy for yourself, when you recognize your need to be quiet, then you might be developing tools that help you understand why this other person needs to be loud.
Bingo. Bingo.
So,
Yeah,
but to
exactly.
tie it back into Facebook, do you think, this is not a leading question, do you think that Facebook has, um, I'll back up a tiny bit. So we're basically saying that we have potential to be non-empathetic and we have potential to be empathetic. Do you think
Mhm.
that the technology of Facebook has enabled people to be less empathetic?
Oh, 100%. In fact, I think it encourages less empathy, because I think that what social media as a whole does is it what's the right word for it? It basically breaks us down into text boxes, And I don't think that there's any way to empathize with a block of text. And I think that's why it's so easy for people to be so vitriolic. I think it's why it's so easy for someone to just type a little insult. I mean, I woke up this morning to a stranger. He just sent me a little Facebook message that just said fag. Yeah, a stranger, a complete stranger who had just probably
Nice.
heard my name on the radio and decided this is what I'm going to do with my day because I'm the, and it's like,
Yeah.
what are you like? What are you getting out of this? Because
Yeah.
he has been trained to dehumanize another person.
Right.
He doesn't believe that I'm a person. He
Yeah.
believes that I'm an enemy, right?
He
And
has
I
an
think that
instant. Sorry, he has an instant way to contact someone who is not a person but a totem of
exactly
an
a representation
ideology.
of all he.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just got a message here that my meeting is going to time out in 5 minutes. I'm not
Okay.
sure why that is, so I may have to. Just redo it and
Totally.
re-up it. So but I don't actually want to. I don't want to draw it out, any longer than is interesting to you.
All
But
good. No, I'm happy to keep going if you want to. That's all good. Yeah.
yeah, no, this is great. One thing I would ask about, because I was able to ignore Facebook for a really long time.
Mhm.
Kind of like, I would say honestly, it wasn't having an extremely negative effect on my life. And then the Donald Trump election happened,
Right.
and that thing was like, I think for a lot of people it was a wake up call that we had not been seeing half of
Yes.
the story.
Yes.
And so I just wondered if that particular event had anything, if that had any effect on you or impact.
Oh, very much
I
so.
mean, I know the election would have had an impact, but I
Yeah,
mean,
sure.
Facebook during the election.
Yeah, no, very much so. I had the idea for the show prior, but then after the election is really when I started, and it even then it still took me a couple of years to really get the ball rolling, but it was sort of the next increment because, you started hearing things about Cambridge Analytica and you started hearing things about targeted, the pixel and the way that they're, breaking our behaviors down into these little they've got all these touchstones, and when you look at them and you're like, "Oh yeah, they've got me down to a T. They've
Yeah.
really got me beat it down." I actually started exploring things like print on demand websites and things like making started making targeted ads on Facebook, and I started practicing it myself for my own little kind of side hustles and all that kind of garbage of like never wanting to have another office job and
Fair enough.
and so I started exploring that stuff. So I was already sort of vaguely aware of the behaviors even before it kind of came out, but to see the scale that it was at and the really ominous behavior, and that to me is what's so complex about Facebook, is that Facebook at its surface is essentially a photo album, more or less. It's kind of a conglomeration of a photo album and like a little black book, like a collection of phone numbers. But so on its surface, it's essentially innocuous because it's essentially just a platform to be used however you use it. It's neither good or bad. It's just sort of a thing. But then you start applying other behaviors to it, and then you start, having people who are willing to exploit others for their own gain.
Manipulate it.
Right?
Yeah.
Exactly. It's this idea. There's this great quote I always come back to that it's sort of peripheral to it, but it's like, you can't call yourself a pacifist if all you are is a coward.
Right.
It's this idea of, just because you don't want to fight doesn't mean you're a pacifist, or just because you can't fight. And it's this, what I mean by that is this idea that somebody out there wants to exploit you, and ignorantly being exploited is one thing, but willingly being exploited is a whole other thing. And
Right.
I think that our usage of Facebook has encouraged this type of behavior. It's encouraged Brexit. It's encouraged Trump. It's encouraged, Andrew Scheer. It's encouraged these kinds of politicians to come out to be brave enough. Maxime, what's his name, Bernier, or the guy with the oppose mass immigration, and it's just like, what are you doing, man? Like, why is this even an issue here in Canada? Like, why do we even care about this in this framework?
And further to that, it seems to me like the polarization created by Facebook. At this point, there was an unexplained interruption in the video recording, and now we return you to the conversation.
You got it.
So one of the things, and you had asked me sort of in an email about my political, nice shirt, my political.
Yeah, sorry.
No, it's good. I feel a little bit like I was raised in a very conservative background, and
Same.
I definitely am on the liberal side now. Like my what's the word? My Facebook echo chamber during the Trump election was definitely on the anti-Trump side. I had
Yes.
no idea he was gonna. I had no idea. I mean, I really thought it was impossible he was going to get in.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
because everybody hates him. What are you talking about? Everybody I've heard. But
Yep.
I also have this feeling that without that was kind of one of the first times that this technology did contribute to a serious problem, and so I have all kinds of thoughts about the polarization going on. It's way more complicated than Facebook,
It
but
is.
with the political polarization that's going on. Everybody is on both sides is feeling pressure towards the extremes. So in other words, you're talking about extreme anti-immigration stuff. Maybe I'm kidding myself to think that there were good old days when there was a little more conversation about these things, or where people didn't actually feel forced towards the extremes in this way, to kind of there's this. Trump proved that there's a built-in audience at the extremes that people had been kind of neglecting with the idea of objectivity in reporting and all of that.
Yeah.
So Facebook, I do think, like, because I try not to be an alarmist, and I really try not to blame the technology, but I think in that particular case, with that particular election, it really did do something. And I think that's what made me give my head a shake, is because I was trying to roll my eyes at everybody on Facebook, the people who overused it, the people who always dissed it but wouldn't leave, and all of that. And yet, I really think it did something there. So there's not a question. It's just
well, no, but I think you're spot on. I think that this idea of the pushing to the extremes, has that always existed or not? I think it has in some capacity. I think there's always been the disenfranchised, and I think there's always been the people who feel left behind. I mean, especially in America, we have proof of all the oh God, what do they call them? The ridings, who that kind of swung back and forth throughout the years have tended to be low income, have tended to be, ones where promises are made and then not followed through on, all the way dating back to Reagan, right? And so, and what is really quite alarming is the way that, the Cambridge Analytica, scam, let's call it what it is, worked, was that it wasn't about massive, huge electoral fraud. It was about targeting small pockets, and
do that better.
The whole federal election came down to something like 50,000 votes, which in a country of, what is it, like 60 million people, it's nothing. That's a drop in the bucket, and so that to me is what's the most frightening demonstration of that technology, is that it proves that our democracies are fundamentally broken. And I believe, God, the American system is actually a better democratic system than the Canadians have. So the fact that they ended up with Trump doesn't give me very much hope for the first past the poll, style voting that we have, right? Which is, like, I lean more liberal, but I think what's a tragedy in Canada is when you say the word liberal, you're immediately associated with a party. And what's a problem with that too is that that's a party that promised electoral reform and then didn't follow through on it. So we are a country that wants to be multi-party, but constantly just slingshots back and forth between two of them.
Yeah, and I really think they're personality types, and I think that's the problem. If people feel pressure to become cartoonish versions of themselves, or cartoonish versions of themselves, or even worse, if they believe that something deep within them is inherently political. it's like, wow,
Yeah.
that's
The
fucked.
egotism. Well, yeah, and that to me is actually a clear, that's a far clearer demonstration of what a politician is than anything else. I think that every politician of every party is a fundamental narcissist, is a fundamental megalomaniac. I think you have to be a nutcase to want to be a
Yeah,
politician. I think that
I
the whole
can't
system,
imagine.
yeah, right. And I think to be such a megalomaniac is to believe that you know what's best for people and you know what's best
Yeah,
for populations, especially populations that don't like you or don't
yeah,
want anything to do with
right.
you. That takes a special kind of narcissism,
I was told at one point, so forgive me if this isn't true, Quakers, but that the Quakers, the religious group, um, would appoint
Mm.
a person to be their leader for a period of time, and it was actually considered a negative if
Yeah,
you
they didn't want it.
wanted
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
If you
yeah. You
wanted
should
it, so
be
it was
steered
like,
clear of it.
okay,
Yeah,
I'll serve my community in this way, and
I
like
have to.
yeah, and I mean it's really not to get religious, but it's really Christ-like in a way. It's like, yeah, I'll serve you by sacrificing my time and myself to you for a
Mhm.
while, and that's not present in politics. So
Whatsoever.
anyway, like I'll say a couple things and we'll get it wrapped up. But
Sure. Yeah.
a while back, I started to try to use my Facebook. I decided to choose. I think it was the election time. It must have been.
Mhm.
I decided to choose what Facebook was going to be for me. So I
Mm,
started sounding off about open-ended
mm,
philosophical things and things related to things that I felt were kind of from a loving place, from a
mhm,
place of caring about humanity. And what happened was I ended up getting a small random community of people from my life who were kind of feeling the need for the types of things that I was talking about. And now I have these nice little conversations about these things, all the things that have been on my mind, and people saying, I appreciate this and that kind of thing.
mm.
So um, I don't really have a point there except just to say that a little bit of intentionality without being self-righteous has really
Yeah.
helped. Has
Curation
really
is a
helped.
really healthy behavior,
Say that
curating.
again.
Curation is a really healthy behavior.
I
It's
think
really
so.
healthy to
Yeah.
curate your surrounding and
Yeah.
curate what you're taking in, right? And also what you're putting out.
Yeah. So then, I guess the last question for you, because maybe you said this on the podcast, but I don't know. Do you is your plan to delete your Facebook account eventually once
Probably,
you've kind of done this?
like, yeah, like probably, but I go back and forth between so much of it, right? One of the running jokes of the show is that we'll unfriend on Facebook and then immediately follow each other on Instagram, which is owned
Right.
by Facebook. So it's literally just an exercise in madness,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so, you know, the other thing too is that at the current friend count that I have, if I was to release just one episode a week, it would take me 10 years to finish the show, so I'll basically be essentially doubling my time on Facebook just to get off of Facebook, right? Which
That's
again is
hilarious.
just this bizarre exercise in
Yeah.
madness. I feel
Yeah.
like it's like one of Plato's symposiums, like
Yeah.
if a man does,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But we're just shadow puppets, right? But
That's
yeah, I
amazing.
took philosophy
The cave.
101. But I would suppose by the time I've gotten everybody off, if it's in some timely manner, then yes, I would close it down. Um, I do still use it for other things, though, right? I
Yeah.
do still use it for a curated web page, for essentially a free web page for the show,
Right. Right.
for other business ventures. It is still what my hope would be, and maybe this is me just kind of being the like deep down cowardly humanist that I kind of am, is this idea of like hopefully before the show is done, Facebook will implode and close, and we'll have a different platform that we need to socialize off of.
Okay. Yeah.
But I mean, that's like saying you'll get yours, McDonald's.
Yeah.
It's
Exactly.
not
Yeah. Yeah.
happening. So
Yeah.
who knows, right?
Well, I love that you're making the personal change, regardless of whether the systemic change or the infrastructural change happens.
Yeah,
I applaud you.
I mean, it's all you
And
can
I
do,
think
right?
everybody listening to this should go check out the podcast. One of the things I love is just conversation. So I mean,
Mm.
I think that's one of the. I think that conversations, to me, it's kind of a holy act.
Yes. Yes. Yep.
It
It's communion.
creates something, regardless if you think there's a real spiritual realm, there is a spirit in between two people in a conversation that's
Bingo.
neither one nor the other when they're listening and reciprocating. So I appreciate you doing that with me today. I appreciate you doing it on your show.
Thank you.
And yeah, thanks very much for letting me interview
Yeah, well,
you.
gee, thank you so much for having me on the show. I really, really appreciate it. And all the
No
kind
problem.
words. I mean, it's really reassuring to know that somebody sees that because that
Yeah.
is the intention, right? And I really appreciate you saying it because the way that all this has been framed recently is about this confrontation, and it's not. It's about conversation. To me, you
Great.
nailed it. It's the holy act of conversation. And you were
Perfect.
saying right at the start the bizarreness that calling somebody on the phone and talking to them is now an act of rebellion is
Yeah.
such a bizarre
Yeah.
line of thinking,
Wow.
but I love talking to people. I love conversations. I think everybody has stories and unique perspectives, and they deserve to be
Yeah.
heard.
Well,
They don't
hey,
know
this
if they
has
deserve to
been
be respected, but
right. Well, there you go. Well, this has been great. So I think there's no better way to end it than that. And maybe we'll talk again in the future or something. But
You got
this
it.
has been great. So
Thank you
thanks
very
so
much.
much, James Avramenko.
Have a good one.
You too, man.